what I wanted to show in this project is that the amount of linguistic work children are engaging in on a daily basis, the amount of translations they engage in, the amount of meaning making in an interlingual space they engage in, they generate huge amount of intellectual resources to work with. They keep a large part of these informations in their working memory, and all of us know that working memory is positively correlated to human intelligence. They also operate with huge amount of linguistic as well as cognitive fluidity, which makes them way more intelligent than many other children. So here are the children who should be traditionally perceived as more intelligent are actually regarded as lacking something. And this is where I thought, okay, it's very important to float a new concept, multilingual intelligence, and then talk about human intellect through one of the very fundamental capacity of human beings, that is language. As the child acquires a language, child discovers that every object has a name, and the child then talks about objects and phenomena through these words. And as they do it, as they talk about, as they engage with it or engage with their knowledge systems, they generate huge amount of linguistic and intellectual resources. And that should make them more intelligent. So the fundamental questions that I was asking is that it's actually definitional. How do we define human intelligence? One of the major, dimension that I included is interpersonal and intersubjective resources. It's not only cognitive, it is also affective, and it is hugely intersubjective. When a child operates in an interlingual or multilingual space, a huge amount of cognitive, affective, and interpersonal, intersubjective resources get generated, and this make the child intelligent. So one of the major departure I made was in including these intersubjective resources in the definition of multilingual intelligence. And of course, all of you know that multilingual, the societies without exceptions are multilingual. Monolingual is only a political myth, and every child is a linguistic adult by the time the child is at least 5 years old. Child acquires a full cognitive linguistic capacity, a semiotic tool to communicate with the world and also express whatever the child wants to express. The child engages in trans oblique multilanguaging, and I'll tell you why I use the trans and multilanguaging both, because the child, when listens to various languages or a multilingual repertoire already part of their everyday world, the child automatically picks up different grammatical elements, different, say phonological and lexical categories from the everyday linguistic context, and then construct his sentences. And that's very spontaneous. But if I look at in the classroom, the process of languaging is often deliberate when children speaking different languages are present in the same class, and also those languages have names and also give identity to them. So I'm an ODI, X is a Bengali, Y is a Telugu speaking person, and when the teacher knows that the medium of instruction is say English, but my students speak different languages and they are not equally proficient in English, the teacher obviously tries to engage in a kind of multilingual dialogue so that it is intellectually accessible to all the students. And there, the borrowing of linguistic elements is deliberate. And if you have read Vygotsky, which I'll be discussing tomorrow, there is a difference between what a spontaneous and deliberative cognitive action does to human intellect. A a deliberative action engages, children or speakers of speakers of languages in, restricting or deciding not to let, say, suppose I'm speaking to you, I try not to speak in Odia. Suppose I bring Hindi, I know this is in, say, Andhra Pradesh, and of course this is a very multilingual kind of class. I try to also bring less Hindi to this, class. I try to bring more Hindi, more English. Suppose I think that no, there are also students who don't understand English very well. I bring some Hindi, but in a manner that people do understand. So I'm deliberately innovating and also, attending to some more. So this executive functions which I will be talking about, which constitutes a central part of human intelligence, has components like working memory, attention and inhibitory functions, actions. So when we innovate, we engage in a kind of deliberate, conscious work, and that generates huge amount of intellectual capacities, because that demands us to function in subtle way and not function in another way. So it's basically more areas of your brain get fired, get involved in talking to each other, in dialoguing with each other, and that results in higher intellectual functioning. And if we look at how we speak, by and large, we translanguage, because if I know that she's from Hindi belt, while speaking to her, I might switch over to Hindi, if not more, but sometimes, but then I may not do that with her because she's from Tamil Nadu. Okay? But then I'm not very conscious of it. I'll just very swiftly do it. I know that, okay, how much Hindi would you know? She would be knowing, three of us are there. I would also know how much Hindi, how much English I bring to my language. But I do it very, very spontaneously. And children, if we observe children in multilingual societies, they do it very effortlessly. My child grew up with Odia, Bengali, because my cook was Bengali and was also looking after her. And me and my husband, we spoke in Odia and also sometimes in English. And around him there was enough English and Hindi, and also Punjabi and Haryanvi. And so when he spoke, obviously he grew up in a multilingual milieu, which most of you do, he very effortlessly translanguages. It doesn't separate languages. And that's how everybody speaks. And then all these languages, if they are present in one space, they maintain a kind of modestness. And as a result, it's not very difficult to, cross the boundaries or borrow from each other. But we are not conscious. We do it very effortlessly. And of course, Chomsky says that we are born with a kind of imprint, which is a grammar, which is structure. So we are born with a structure, using which we actually process the language and produce a sentence. So he said that, okay, there is something that we are wired with, and using which we language. So what we hear, they constitute a larger linguistic repertoire, which is multilingual, and I freely pick up from that multilingual repertoire to produce sentences in a multilingual context. If I'm only growing up in Odia, but Odia is also not a single language, it is also borrows from other languages, and it's very difficult to find, an area in Odisha, as much as we'll find it very difficult in Andhra Pradesh, an area where people only speak Telugu. Other languages will be spoken. There is TV also, where you hear other languages as well. But we pick up spontaneously the grammatical elements and constitute the sentences. But there are also times, and that happens all the time, when I am more aware of the linguistic background of the speakers, and I consciously pick up linguistic elements and constitute my sentence. And that deliberative, process is very different from the earlier one. And that's the reason I often use trans/multilingualism as a concept. And for me, the default expression of language is multilingual. So I write multi within bracket language because almost all the languages without exception are multilingual repertoire because they have grown, and as several linguists, including Rama, says that they grow in the company of other languages. They actually borrow and contribute to the growth of other languages. So all the languages by and large are multilingual repertoire. And if I look at the social context of speakers, it's very difficult to find a monolingual community. So all classrooms, all communities are basically default multilingual societies, communities. And so therefore language means multilingual, multi-language, and which involves, as I'm saying, two processes, very spontaneous and also deliberate. Okay, here I'll distinguish between two very core theoretical positions. One, of course, Chomsky, which says that there is language acquisition device we are born with. So in other words, we have a grammatical structure, a print. Okay, a language develops outside me. I pick up the language from outside, but I have a grammar using which I produce, the sentences. But then there are also constructionists. They say that no, we are born with several cognitive and intellectual capacities which are domain-free, and these domains actually interact with each other and help us produce language. Okay, they call themselves constructionist grammar theory. I mean, the theory they call constructionist grammar theory or usage-based, grammar. And well, I try to take a position, but it is very difficult to take a position. But recently, I'm taking the second position. That's because the evidence for the first position is now several evidences are challenged. Basic assumptions, some of the basic assumptions are challenged, and also if you look at how these different cognitive domains work, the child starts speaking at the age of 2 or 2.5, and very quickly the child has full language, at least very basic linguistic system the child has, using which the child communicates. But first 2 years, the child is silent. The child is listening to what mother, what the caregiver, what the neighbor speaking, what is coming on TV. The child is fundamentally living in a very linguistically rich environment. And if you're a psychologist, you know that 2 years is a very long time to discover the structure. If that was not the case, discovering a pattern and theorizing a pattern would have been humanly impossible. If discovering a pattern outside, theorizing that pattern, and also building on that that pattern is humanly possible, as you see in physics and mathematics discipline. Then why not language? And 2 years of listening is a very, very long time. And therefore, the new cognitive neuropsychological research and also cognitive theories are moving towards usage-based or constructionist grammar paradigm because of this. Because one is not very sure we're actually born with, if we are born with a grammatical structure or not, or 3, 4, or several grammatical structures. So second is, the second is, the human brain, if we observe how it works in all other domains, developing a complex language like this can be difficult. Earlier I think Chomsky and others said that it's an experimental child, like the child developed the language through construction, so that's almost impossible to describe development of such a huge language. But then now the construction is to show even more complex systems evolving based on these domain general cognitive abilities and the interaction between them. Okay. Why this is important, I'll come to it later. But yes, this digression I'm now taking partly also because to because it enables me to intervene in the system of education with this position. Because if everything is I'm born with, then I have so little to work on. That's not a real Chomsky. Chomsky also talks about how the language develops in society. It's not only that, but the cognitive work that takes place, if it is combinatorial, if different domains are talking to each other, then the kind of intellectual resources they develop in the domain of language learning is enormous. And I think that is one of the major affordance I lose when I take only Chomskyan paradigm and work with how anybody learns like this. Okay, I'll just now quickly go through my slides. So basically multilingualism is norm and not an exception. Everybody trans or multilingual and multilinguality. Okay. I was thinking, what am I doing? Because I was on my 8th, 9th slide. Sorry. Before I proceed, I want to show some data. See, this is a Dominic speaker, a politician, local politician. He was addressing his, addressing the people, and he was using, look at how many languages, and also how he was using these languages. And he said, if I want to be understood by my people, I have to speak in a language that they understand. And the moment he saw that there are Marwadis, there are Garassias, and there are Gujaratis, and this is how he spoke. Okay. He goes to another area, and this is again he, and again the color somehow went. This is by another speaker. The combination of languages is very different. And whether to call it very spontaneous or deliberate is another debate. But it was, when I was talking to him, it was a deliberate action. He first sees how many, who all are in the audience, and accordingly he speaks. And look at the kind of facility with which this political leader operates, and the kind of intellectual, resources. Finally, this should be resulting in. And this is the norm. And we also studied the classroom, conversation between a non-Garassia teacher in a Garassia dominant class. Garassia is a tribe in Rajasthan. So this is a class where majority of children are Garassia speakers, and the teacher was not a Garassia speaker. So how was combining the languages? So is ladke ko maro mat. Wahan pe is combining 3 languages. And if you go down, is combining again 3 or 4 languages. Okay. And this was part of my Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh study, where I tried to show that multilingualism is a norm. This was in remote tribal areas, and it is not an exception. If you think that only urban areas are multilingual, or towns are multilingual, no, even the most rural tribal area is multilingual. And the reason why I started with this, because I wanted to argue, if I think through language primarily, and if I use language in such a deliberate manner, and this languaging, the verb form, this languaging evolves, starting the minds of people, the interlocutors, the other speakers, what do they think, what languages they know, and I employ this language or multilingual, certain kinds of multilingual practices to create a rich intersubjective plane so that we are together, we communicate, and I drive, your emotions with me, like the political leader was trying. I am obviously operating with huge amount of complex cognitive, affective, and intersubjective resources, and that makes any human being intelligent. So human intelligence can be best described through the way we all language in our daily basis, because that's one of the major semiotic tools that we use to communicate. I can now understand I was getting too confused with the slide, and I was I wasn't able to understand where I'm going. Anyway, so what do I do in this paper? I argue that the uniquely human capacity for trans-subject multilanguaging and translanguaging constitute a large part of human intellect. Because as the child figures out that every object has a name, the child then thinks as well as speaks through that language. So all the intellectual communications, and also as the child has a concept and that concept has a name, the child thinks through that. And my politics of knowledge is about freeing intelligence discourse from being predominantly a dry, esoteric cognitive science phenomenon to a cultural historical phenomenon that places equal emphasis on phylogeny and ontology. It's basically, language is both inside and outside, you know. So it's not only inside me, it's also outside me, it's hugely outside. And there is an ontogenetic history to my language, and therefore there is an ontogenetic history to my intellect. It's not only learning, my intelligence also has an ontogenetic history, and therefore it is cultural at the same time. I argue that a conceptual framing, multilingual intelligence decolonizes the text of belonging, offers epistemic voice to its speakers, and create conditions for emergence of new societies for a new humanity founded on equality and epistemic justice. You know, the early intelligence theory is about what speed with which you can solve a problem, how far you outdo another person. It was very Machiavellian. Like, you have to be better than others. You have to outdo another person. Whereas human intellect is about everything. Like, how do I function? My intellectual, my cognitive, my affective, and my intersubjective resources. You know, and also all these, also about the sociality of me. All these create a sociality for me from where I communicate. And by bringing multilingual intelligence to center, I actually bring all these human capacities or intellectual capacities on board to work with. And also, this equalizes every child, irrespective of whether you are a Chomskyan or a cognitive linguist. Chomsky also is a cognitive linguist, also a constructionist grammar theorist. Okay, you agree on one thing, that almost, I mean, the language, everybody has this, you know, cognitive capacity, the linguistic capacity of full and almost equally. So everybody is equally intelligent. The urban and rural, the poor and the rich, upper caste, lower caste, take anybody. They have this particular resource equally developed, and therefore it actually creates a very new paradigm of epistemic justice. It gives voice to everybody. It allows everybody to use whatever knowledge they have, including the affective resources they have, and therefore an education system imagined or built on this kind of concept will only be of equal. It will only bring in equity. My pedagogy is about how to work against disciplinary bad faith and towards human freedom and liberation. Bad faith is that human intelligence is not, is about this speed, is about this outdoing. So therefore your AI has to, you know, create something, you know, very different, something that is ahead of you. We're always about this speed and how do I accomplish this discursive task in my paper? Using the concept of multilingual intelligence, I disengage with the coloniality of language. Because everybody has linguistic capacity equally developed, and therefore the languages do not stay in hierarchy when it comes to intelligence. Yes, you find hierarchy in the classroom because the classroom has chosen a language over other languages. But otherwise, all of us are equally equipped with this linguistic capacity or intellectual capacity. I disagree with the coloniality of language, knowledge, and human mind for distinguishing coloniality from colonialism. from language as a unitary system to language as multi-semiotic, multimodal system. So earlier I was redefining language. Language is not a unitary system. It's actually a multilingual resource. Replace the term language by multilingual, with a small a. I add a verb form to language and call it languaging. Linguists are obsessed with this language, and languaging is left to sociolinguists or pragmatists. And I'm not bothered about that. I mean, even when I'm talking about, what is that we are, working with in terms of structures. Finally, it is this languaging which I'm experiencing and I'm operating with. So I think I am very comfortable with adding this verb and use this, languaging as the central concept. Languaging involves both spontaneous and highly automated system to a deliberate system of working with multilingual urban poor, which I just explained. A major departure from the early theories of intelligence. This is one argument I bring in, not only primary abstractions, but also secondary and tertiary abstractions. I include in defining human intelligence. How and where I differ from Chomsky, I have already discussed. And Howard Gardner, I'll just place him historically. So when we were discussing about human intelligence being about this general capacity, Thurston and subsequently Gardner talked about spatial intelligence, and this spatial intelligence were about this deliberate actions, though they did not use the term there, but they were about secondary and tertiary abstractions involving learning in a cultural context. This brings the new society. To place multilingual intelligence as a concept, I operated methodologically in the beginning with some kind of correlational work. I wanted to see how human intellectual, the traditionally concept human intelligence correlates with various linguistic capacities. And then I tried to generate some evidence for, multilingual intelligence. Multilanguage is the complete cognitive resource a child has at the age of 5. This is like every child is universally endowed with this capacity to have language developed completely by age 5, and the child functions also equally intelligently by the age of 5. Why this is important? Because every child has this resource. Because we trans and multilingual constantly, we generate many, as I said, intersubjective and resources. Multilinguality. What I show is that the multilingual children, not I, several researchers have shown, and I'm using that as an evidence, that multilingual children have better executive functions and cognitive flexibility. Executive functions, all of you psychology students may be knowing, that it comprises of working memory. So when we see something, when we hear, we put something in our working memory. So immediately if I want to recall, I can get it. And in oral communities, what happens? People keep a lot in their working memory. Okay? When we didn't have this phone, where we now can save the phone numbers. I'm sure all of you may be remembering several phone numbers. You ask me the phone number of my husband, I may not be able to tell you what it is, because there is a machine to which I have outsourced. It does the memory work for me. So I don't have to remember anymore. And so, but what happens that in a multilingual context where we operate with several languages, we keep a lot of linguistic information in our working memory. And an expanded working memory, research shows that enhances intellectual functioning of children. Similarly, I mentioned about inhibition. So when I'm talking to a Bengali person, and I know that that person doesn't know English very well, and I know some words in Bengali, so I'll try to use less English. So I'm telling myself that don't use English more. Speak, maybe Hindi, because which belongs to the same linguistic family, that of Bengali. And so if I speak Hindi slowly or Odia slowly, this person will understand it first. Okay. So I'm telling not to do something, and I'm telling to myself to do something. So I'm inhibiting, and also I'm attending to certain aspects, certain components in that interlingual context a little more. That is enhancing my cognitive capacities, because more, as I said, more areas of my brain works. So there is a positive correlation. Several researchers, there are many, you can look at my papers, hundreds of researchers have already shown a positive relationship between multilingualism and executive functions. And cognitive fluidity is also, we see a positive relationship. I'll come down where in subsequent, in subsequent slides, I'll explain what they are. Multilinguality, theory of mind and intersubjective resources. This is very unique. I'll tell you why I have problem with Chomsky's theory. I mean, where I bring my argument against Chomsky's theory is that the Homo sapiens, phylogenetically, when they evolved phylogenetically, they got mirror neuron, it's called mirror neuron, which allowed them to understand or develop what is called theory of mind. That everybody has a mind, and that mind can be different from mine, and the minds are behind my actions. Okay? This is a terribly complex cognitive capacity that Homo sapiens developed, which allowed them to take a perspective or change a perspective or develop one theory and reject it in favor of another theory. It allowed us to create this one, suppose I look at this chair, it's okay, maybe it has a good back support. And I will be thinking that, okay, when I was a child, this was never an issue. And the chairs I had, nobody even talked about whether I have a back support or back support. But then, people worked on, because they realized that no back support, because we are having sedentary work, back support is fundamental. So maybe at some point people thought about it, they must have experimented with it, and let me see what is the kind of understanding that has gone into giving this shape. So what am I fundamentally doing? I'm engaging with several generations of people who might have engaged in the production of this chair. So this chair is produced in a factory, and there was a design which was worked out by engineers, and that has produced this chair. But I am historically engaging with this chair in terms of how different generations of people might have invested in this one and might have produced. And then I may say that, okay, no, I can improve it. I can make it better. So every artifact, whether it's a chair, a table, or a computer, or a whiteboard, or or even a linguistic concept, has evolved through this process of our engagement, and which was possible because of this mirror neuron. I can think what this man who produced this chair might have in his mind, or what is the kind of training he got which helped him to produce this chair. Which are the schools that give you this training? So I'm engaging with so many different things. That's uniquely human. And any human being who has domain-general cognitive capacities like categorizing, classifying, naming, and know that these are terribly complex cognitive actions. And also understand that the way she's looking at the same object, but she may be thinking differently than her, or she may be thinking differently. I'm thinking about it differently. This capacity to constantly engage with these concepts and objects and then reify to where they are today is uniquely human. And a capacity like this, when is combined with capacities or other general capacities like say categorization, naming, classifying, abstracting and developing a theory. When I classify, I may have a theory about it. They are immensely capable of producing a complex language. You do not need a grammatical system. You do not need to be born with a grammatical system to be able to produce or do it at the age of 2 or 3. And ample evidences. And theory of mind is actually a big supportive evidence against Chomskyan paradigm. And this is like a lot of neuropsychological work is actually extending support. Okay, cognitive fluidity, I'll come to that. Theory of mind, as I said. And therefore, this plane is already an intersubjective plane. Okay? There is no space which is just individual, no. It is always an intersubjective plane where the emotions are invested, knowledge is invested, motives are invested, and I constantly work in this plane. That makes me interested. And know that anything I'm trying to talk about or imagine, I think that through the semiotic system or semiotic. It's essentially, mind is essentially mediated. And so my engagement with the world through this semiotic tool makes me interested. So human intelligence cannot be defined or cannot be understood, or maybe better understood through this. So the final argument I basically give is that the human intelligence is a default account of our capacity to language. So metaphors, Ramachandran, many of you may be knowing, the neuropsychologist. One of the major claims he had made long back, not that he proved it, but there are many evidences, indirect evidences supporting that. He's still not able to get direct evidence for it because probably he's not getting many, can't metaphorize and then work with them. But what he was arguing is that one of the arguments he gives is, he was the one who made mirror neuron popular. And one of the arguments he gives that if we are not capable of metaphorizing, could we have done mathematics or developed this knowledge to this extent? Because mathematical concepts are entirely discursive concepts. They are born in the discourse, they develop in the discourse, they are theorized in the discourse. So what is foundational to mathematical thinking or to mathematical concepts and discourses is this ability to metaphorize. Okay? And if we cannot metaphorize, his claim is that we would not have developed this complex mathematics. Okay? Now this is tremendously critical, cognitive capacity that we are born with. And suppose, let me give you an example. Tomorrow I'll do more of it. Suppose I ask you to show me one. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. I didn't understand the whole metaphorizing Could you elaborate?
Yeah. Suppose pani. Pani refers to water. So there is an object immediately gets evoked when we talk about, when I say pani. Okay? And then you say, मैं सरम से पानी पानी हो गई. And when you say, मैं सरम से पानी पानी हो गई, it's a very complex cultural knowledge. And if we share that knowledge, we immediately understand what the other person is saying. So here this word pani is used, but it refers to something else. That's metaphor. Okay? And our capacity to metaphorize also allows us to function very differently intellectually. And what I wanted to tell you that if you want to talk about human intelligence, can you talk about it without this capacity? Because this capacity allows you to interact with complex knowledge systems much more precisely and much more efficiently, you know. And therefore, you are considered an insider of a culture when you share these metaphors. And these metaphors, ये नहीं कि मुझे ये नहीं आता है तो I don't have metaphors. No, every community has hundreds and hundreds of metaphors, you know. And we have this capacity to develop, and it's not only linguistic, it's cultural. Okay, metaphors are fundamentally cultural because they get their meanings in this cultural space. It is often tertiary, not even secondary abstractions. It emerges from tertiary abstractions. And these tertiary abstractions actually make you way more intelligent. And therefore, when you go to a tribal area, you say, you know, जैसे कोई elderly person से बात करते हैं, जैसे यहाँ इनमें बहुत wisdom है. And often they speak using many metaphors. Anyway, what I wanted to argue here is that this linguistic capacity, when we talk about, is way more complex than constructing a sentence or constructing a very long sentence, and sometimes showing a lot more creativity in constructing those sentences. It is about using metaphors, it is about taking multiple perspectives, it is about developing theories, it is about, you know, you are a scientist. You almost work like a scientist. And yet, you also reject some hypothesis. And you say, no, I'm not going to, you know, I have my own method and own style. You know, you assert. You have an identity developed around it. And you speak from that subjective position. And it's so central to your affective, you know, domain. Okay? And when I say it's culturally different, I also refer to their affective registers. If I don't allow their language, I also don't allow their affective registers. And the argument towards the end what I give is that when we don't allow children's language, and when I say we don't allow children's languages to enter the classroom, we don't allow their cultural resources, their affective registers, and their own identities to enter the classroom. In other words, we ask them to be empty slates, and then we tell them to get perfect mathematics score, perfect this score, and be a performer. No, they all break down to one. Okay. So if I argue, if we think that education should have the right definition of human intellect, then we need to understand it differently. And we need to understand it in everyday terms. What my everyday gives me. What kind of intellectual capacities my everyday gives me. Okay? And then I'll probably be able to conceptualize an inclusive class. The last argument I was actually giving that whenever we multi-language, we trans-knowledge. As more and more languages enter, more knowledge systems enter. Knowledge system is not about only mathematics, physics, no. It's about the emotional resources. I mean, it's about poetry, it's about their stories, it's about their everyday struggle, it's about everything, you know, that they have. Okay, so multi-languaging is always accompanied by trans-knowledge. As I multi-language, I trans-knowledge. As I trans-knowledge, my intellectual capacities only enhances. I have talked about working memory attention, cognitive flexibility. Many researchers, I haven't put the references because there are actually several researchers. They run into hundreds. You know, if you take student research, the PhD researchers, they may run into several hundreds. Cognitive flexibility, like multilingual children, show not. I mean, there are also studies that don't show that correlation, but many major studies have shown positive relationship between cognitive flexibility and multilingualism. So a child who is multilingual and is allowed to operate with his or her multilingual resources shows higher amount of cognitive flexibility. All of you know, it refers to skill that allows us to think divergently, change perspectives and adapt to a constantly changing environment. And this mirror neuron actually gives you this cognitive flexibility. And this is very fundamental to, like you go to a new place, I'm telling you what happened yesterday. So I wanted to ask the driver where this road goes. Because वो बीच में मुझे एक restaurant में लेके गया, आनंद भवन, all of you must know. So I said, okay, this road where it goes. Then I realized if I ask him in full sentence, one, he will, whether he will understand my accent and also how much English he knows. So what did I do? I said, this road goes where? Or goes हाथ से दिखाई. I didn't say it goes. This road, I said goes also. Where? And he looked at me. When I said it second time, he said Kolkata. Okay. And in fact, entire, the length, during my commutation, I was communicating with him only through lexicons and few select verbs. Okay, that he will understand. And I could, not that I was talking a lot with him, but I could at least communicate few things. So what was I doing? And what was creating this facility? Cognitive flexibility is very central to like how do you adjust to new situation and novel situation. That's where the intellectual function is required. It's actually required every time. So both executive functions and cognitive flexibility are major predictors of not only human intelligence but also of academic success. Okay? So when you see a positive relations between multilingualism and these two functions, you know that the human intellect has to be understood way differently. So what Howard Gardner did, he talked about 7 intelligences, of which verbal intelligence is one. Okay? And I'm not denying, I'm not saying that other intelligences are not important. What I wanted to say is that when you say spatial intelligence, what is it about? It's again about patterns, again about theorizing patterns, and then talking about phenomenal concepts through patterns. Language is also that. Okay, music is also about that. That's another kind of intelligence. So what underlie these intelligences are different kinds of abstractions and theorization we have. And part of it is always learned. It's not about what we are born with. Cognitive fluidity is another concept which cognitive psychologists talk about quite a lot. And in intelligence discourse, these two concepts, fluid and crystallized intelligence, actually endured quite until recently. Even now we talk about these two intelligences. The fluid intelligence, all of you know from where it gets its name, is actually phylogenetically inherited cognitive skills that flow easily into various domains to create primary abstractions. And crystallized intelligences are about secondary and tertiary intelligences. Therefore, most of the intelligences that Gardner talked about do belong to crystallized intelligence. Even language was seen more as that, and that was problematic. So even when I didn't seem to be close to Howard Gardner. What Howard Gardner did, that he diverted from this general intelligence idea to multiple intelligences and said that people develop different kinds of intellectual capacities in different domains. That's what he did. The argument that I am giving is that all these intelligences have something underlying them. I don't call it general, because general is about what the abstraction you have prior to learning. There's primary abstractions. I talk about all 3 kinds of abstractions and also the kind of intellectual resources these 3 abstractions make possible. They together constitute human intelligence. The argument I bring in here is that there is, like suppose if you've read Vygotsky, you'll understand that when the child is not speaking, can't say chair, okay, when mother said chair, the child knows that mother refers to this, but the child is not able to. Child now knows that it has a name, but the child is not able to use it. But there was a time when child doesn't know that yes, there is a name. When the mother said chair, child may look around to figure out what the mother is trying to say. And when the mother looks at this, the child also directs his attention to at this object. And then as this occurs again and again, the child knows that both of them are actually talking about this. This joint attention, this collaboration, makes language learning possible and makes every kind of learning possible. And also create this intersubjective plane that we talk about. The moment they direct their attention together, they create this intersubjective plane. And that actually develops further into more complex intellectual and linguistic capacities. Okay. So, so as the child enters this linguistic phase, when the child has a name for everything, so the child says, I want water, but the child doesn't look at water and shows it. वो इधर देख रहा है, पानी उधर है. Child says, मुझे पानी चाहिए. Mother also gives him water. What is happening? They're referring to an object without looking at it. Okay, they are talking about this. So this word has replaced the object. Okay, that is the states. Most of the communications and engagement with novice, when I say with human beings and culture, obviously with novice systems, is done through semiotic. So if we know how this works, if you have a theory of semiotics, we also have a theory of intelligence. Okay. I'll not stress, it's too fun. By doing so, I will also deny any intellectual capacities in pre-linguistic phase. But I'll drag it because once you are a linguistic adult, if I ask you to think, okay, let me do this experiment. I'll take only one. Think about anything, but without employing a language or languages, and report that to me. Take 1 minute, just think about it and tell me. Without employing language. किसी चीज के बारे में, think about anything you want, but you will not employ language in that thing. You can take like time to think about it, but suppose you are not able to, are you able to think without language? Do you therefore say that a child in the pre-linguistic stage doesn't think? Yeah. Yeah, tell.
I mean, what if you're thinking visually, like if you're thinking of an image? I mean, I know that I would be able to give you the word for that image to explain what I'm thinking about, but...
So, she's thinking not using language, but using another semiotic medium. In other words, if I ask you not to use any semiotic medium and think, it will be impossible. Almost impossible. Suppose, but as I'm saying, that is difficult. Okay. But if I ask you not to use any concept and think, you can use visual medium, you can use anything, language, anything. Yeah. But I ask you not to use a concept. Can you think? This is where it's a big problem. Yeah.
What do you mean by
concept? Pani. When I say pani and you understand, obviously it's a concept between us.
So, I have a question. Is what you're saying similar to the secure work hypothesis?
Just a little louder.
Is what you're saying similar to the secure work hypothesis? That
okay. No, I'll not entirely reduce it to that. Yes, the cognition is like language gives rise to certain kinds of cognitions. You can say yes, partly, but I'm saying I'm just wanting you to discuss about how do we think? How does anybody think? Okay. So without language you can think, but without a concept you cannot think. Now all the concepts are now languaged, mostly. Or at least there is a semiotic representation, which is mediated. And that is allowing us to think about anything, okay, and everything that is around us. And so if I talk about human, just one minute, so if I talk about human intellect, how it works and how it develops, I cannot talk about it unless I talk about how we think. And our thinking is so much done through the semiotic resources. So if you tell me that, okay, I'm reducing intelligence theory to a theory of semiotics, then that is problematic. Okay? No, semiotic theory is about representation. Intelligence is about how we think. So they're very different, yeah.
So is this necessarily about how we think, maybe not conceptualize, but yeah, how we think? Is the question related to how we think, or is specifically how we...
Okay, that becomes a little
Is it necessarily related to how we think, or simply how we're able to translate our ideas?
So is translation not part of thinking?
Well, I would say there might be something that I can't ever hope to communicate externally, but there might still be.
Yeah. See, if you read Vygotsky very carefully, there is a phase which is like thought. It's pre-linguistic. So before we develop language, we think. But thinking is mostly like when we think about anything. It is mostly concepts. So thinking without it, like as you are saying, that you cannot be reporting that, but you are still thinking. Think about something and say that you are not employing any concept, and you are still able to think.
Well, I suppose maybe it depends on what we consider thinking. So I don't know exactly if this fits into what you're trying to ask of me, but there is this like specific feeling, I suppose, that I get, but I wouldn't exactly call it a feeling, that I feel whenever I get sick. It's very like circumstantial and very specific, and it's something that it's just this like not, yeah, I don't know how to explain it.
Okay, no, I get it. I tell you, I think what you are saying is like I'm feeling something and I really don't know about it. Tell me. Say, cognition have you read? Like, okay, this, I see this word, or this, I see you. The light falls in, gets refracted, falls in my eyes, an image is formed. That image is not you. Because that image is like, as again light, okay? But when does it become you?
Well, I suppose that's the question.
Yeah. So we call it cognition only when I interpret that image. Okay. Before that, it's just sensory thing. Thought is about, it's about, and so when I say thinking is impossible without a concept. So you are thinking, okay, I'm thinking something, but what you're saying that I'm feeling something and I don't know what it is. You're still employing concepts that I'm feeling something. Feeling is a concept. Something. I still don't know what it is. So everything that you're saying, is about some other concepts. So even when you are thinking about something that you're not able to comprehend, to think about it, you're still employing concepts. Okay. So what I wanted to tell you is, why I'm discussing this, and I'll do probably a little more tomorrow, is because if this is how human minds work, how do you understand human intellect? So the earlier engagement with just, giving some intelligence task and seeing if they perform better, Bennett tests or any kind of test, intelligence test you get, and you say that, this performed did better than the other group. And it's not a great way of understanding human intellect. Not that it doesn't say anything about human intellect. It says a lot about human intelligence. But then, if this is the minimum that human intelligence does, or this is the process through which human intelligence develops, then this could be probably one of the major way of understanding human intelligence. That's what I was trying to tell. The politics behind, the political agenda behind this is because everybody has this capacity. Whether you are poor, you are rich, you are from urban area, you are from rural area, this capacity develops. And therefore, it makes everybody equally intelligent. I'll not say some are more intelligent because they have certain capacities more, but at least, and then if education is about, I should conclude.
No. Just adjusting the temperature. I think it's a little cold.
Let me just quickly, no, you don't have to read this. I have discussed most of it. I have also discussed.
We have like 25 minutes, right? 5 minutes. We have 25 minutes. We can take a question or whatever.
Yeah, I'll take some questions. And while I take, when, theory of mind I discussed with you, why this is important, I told you. It helped me in two ways. It helped me in challenging Chomsky and also in understanding human intelligence in a way more complex manner, because human intelligence was not understood. वो affective domain पे intersubjectivity को रख दिया गया, and human intelligence is all about who does something more accurately at a higher speed, all that, and that bullshit I wanted to challenge, and I thought this is way more complex, and this may be one of the concepts through which we can understand human intelligence. And phylogenetic history we have discussed. When we were discussing about ontogenetic history, the difference between phylogeny and ontogeny. Phylogeny is about what we have been evolved phylogenetically or to be. Like what kind of evolutionary benefits we have got. Language is one. When the vocal cord straightened and you got some space here and you could produce some sounds, some vibrations, and then the moment we produced sounds and we can control those sounds, and those sounds came into this intersubjective, interpsychological plane between people. We started interpreting them and we started using them as resources for communication. All these have evolved and we have invented languages. We are not born with language. We are born with, if at all Chomsky is right, we are only born with some print. But then languages developed here. And so what develops during my lifetime in my active interaction with my environment is the ontogenetic history, right? What develops during. So intelligence has an ontogenetic history, and what I'm saying that theory of mind allows you, I'll tell you why this is important. When I was starting this, the kind of mathematics, Saura, that's a tribe in Odisha, tribal children engage in. How do they engage with mathematical ideas and concepts? How do they engage in some kind of algorithmic works, if not written, but at least oral algorithmic works? I'll tell you tomorrow how they were reorganizing and doing, simple calculations. So that time, what I realized that, and this is very Piagetian minded. He has written one full book on this. The book is called Chance, Probability, no chance. Probability or chance? I'll have to check. Okay, the full book is on this, okay, theory of chance. And where he says that as children grow and the language develops, and if you analyze those languages, that language, it is always probabilistic. and this is Deleuze that will make it, make more sense here. Like past, present, future, like if you look at Heidegger, so what is present? Yeah. If you say that you live for today, no. You live for tomorrow. You want to complete your undergrad, you want to be a good student, you want to do this. You came to this lecture to learn few things. It's always like present is about the future and past is present. Okay. And nobody has asked you to do it. You're wired for it. And in the process, how do we talk? Maybe I'll benefit from this. It could work for me. Well, it may not work. These are modal logic terms that children use. And in oral communities where children engage in a lot of storying orally, grandmothers constantly tell you stories, a lot of metaphors are used, and you will see that these modal logic terms develop much better. And when I was in school, there was a kind of belief in Krea, where I grew up, that Odia medium ke bachche mathematics badhiya karte. And when you ask the teachers, those who go to English medium schools, they have more educated parents, better resources. But जब mathematics के पास बात आता था, वो बोलते थे नहीं ओडिया medium के बच्चे mathematics अच्छा करते हैं. They will not say anymore. But those days, or they may say, I don't know. But ये है कि the kind of linguistic capacity we have developed, which is this probabilistic, which has many such modal logic terms. We support mathematical thinking. Mathematics is all about that, because we create, hypotheses. We talk in, propositional terms. If this is this, then this will be this. Okay, and this is where modal logic terms are used a lot. So a child who has more, mentalistic terms and modal logic terms developed will do mathematics better if the child is allowed to use that linguistic resource, as well as the kind of experiences the child has. Knowledge is embedded in language. So if you bring in language, anyway knowledge comes. So that's the argument I was giving. And so they will perform better. So if you're not doing well, it's not that you're not intelligent. Just the fact, you are reduced to blank slate in a context where human intelligence is understood very differently. Okay. So if we look at the life of children and how they grow, and we see the kind of modal logic terms they develop, kind of mental state terms they develop. नहीं वो खुश नहीं आज मेरे like when we engage in pretend play, record the kind of language children use. Pretend play is very important. Actually, we are becoming terribly insecure and psychologically more crippled people, because some of these psychological resources are not allowed to develop. They develop in free play. They develop in pretend play. Okay? Because you constantly give language not only to your emotions, but to others' emotions through your toys, through, आज मेरे, पॉपी खुश नहीं है, ये मेरा पॉपी लोग है, खुश नहीं है, गुस्सा है, मेरे तरफ देख नहीं रहा है. Look at the way the child is talking about. And an expanded repertoire of this kind not only makes you more intelligent, it also allows you to engage in mathematical and physical, in knowledge related to mathematics and physics. Okay. And like जो बच्चा कहता है आज मैं पापा हूँ तुम मम्मी हो, मैं जा रही हूँ शॉपिंग करने के लिए, तुम चावल चढ़ा दो, and the child pretends कि वो चावल बना रही है, and देर हो गया, कुछ नहीं, वो वहाँ बैठी है, the child is angry that नहीं तुम जल्दी घर वापस नहीं आए. Okay? Do you know what is happening? The child is a shopkeeper, the child is a father, the child is a controller, the child is deciding everything the child is doing in the same play. And the kind of emotional language the child develops, the kind of cognitive capacities the child develops, the kind of intersubjective capacities, I'm not This is where I'm using capacity. With us, what one likes, resources. They are about capacity. The development is enormous. And because we now undermine it, बच्चा पैदा होता है तो लाइब्रेरी खड़ा हो जाता है. That's my friends and my younger students are doing now. So intelligence theory didn't talk about the emotion much, and so what they did, emotional intelligence. How can you separate these two? Can I talk about emotional intelligence without talking about basic cognitive capacities? Can I talk about cognitive capacities without talking about emotional intelligence? I cannot. As much as what my students do is, because that's how textbooks are written. Motivation theory. So 5 classes to teach motivation theory. उससे पहले क्या हुआ, लर्निंग पढ़ा दिया, उसके बाद मोटिवेशन थियरी पढ़ाएंगे, उसके बाद एफेक्ट पढ़ाएंगे. Give me one example where you can talk about just any one of them without the other. I have given this challenge to people, it's impossible. Because this field is motivating. This field where all of your time and emotions are currently invested in, okay, itself is creating motivational structure. It doesn't come from outside, it doesn't come from the space. You don't need a separate theory for motivation. If I say everybody is sleeping, I might just create a counterintuitive idea here, and then some of you just wake up and start thinking. Or you crack a joke, and then some people just get up and talk. Motivation theory is here, where emotional theory of emotion is. You cannot separate them. For teaching, you may have separated. So this intelligence theory is a bogus work. You can't talk about separate them. Anyway, so this ontogenetic history of human development is very, very important, because what happens in that thing are these. There are many. I haven't put all, but I just wanted to tell you that what we reverse is what is natural to a child. What we bring in is actually, and therefore when my friends tell me that my daughter or my son is going through a terrible psychological problem, I'm living with a young boy now, and just reflect back what you have done to that child. उसको क्लास में फर्स्ट होना था, IIT क्लियर करना था, and MUN बनना था, सब कुछ करना था उसके लिए. As I told you, I have seen this happening. All of you may be saying, the child is not even born. Mother is worried about creating a library. The mother doesn't think that I should be talking to my child, I should give more time. Grandmother should talk to the child. नहीं, 10 किताब पहले आ जाएगा, the 10 toys पहले आ जाएगा. Okay, I'm not saying that these toys don't play a role, or games don't play a role in child's life, but they do not replace pretend play or free. Anyway, so
in fact, Bodhrova has a paper that shows that pretend play has declined historically in cultures. Like it's
because we are structuring it. Adult presence is there. So if I'm not there, the governess will be there. If both of us are not there, then there is a teacher there. When is the child left to her, and also single child or 2 children families? So, and we are scared to let our children play in the playground without adult supervision. So the society is evolving in that manner. It's making us emotionally more vulnerable. Okay, intersubjectivity I have discussed, and
I think it's we have like 10 minutes.
yeah, I'll just wind it up. Yeah. I've discussed most of this. I'll do one thing. I teach in an education department, but it's an educational studies department. It doesn't do BA right? So we do psychology, but we apply our theories to education. So this is the last slide. I'll read out. Why I thought we should talk about multilingual intelligence. and also not to replace other terms, but to bring home certain kinds of debates which we do not engage in when we look at human intellect through other theories. Because I've already discussed that MI can foreground an education system that equalizes the rich and the poor, the migrant and the settled, the dominated and the privileged in terms of human intellect and the cognitive and intersubjective resources that this intelligence creates. I'll just, 1 minute, I'll take 1 or 2 minutes. You know, when I say that this can provide a kind of framework or can provide some principles for developing educational practices. What I mean is that the least a teacher can do is allow children to speak freely in the classroom. And if, this is my 2006 paper on mathematics, where I argued that if I bring in a concept and I develop a discourse around concepts, say relations, or say memory, or say food, any concept you take, and I generate a dialogue. Dialogue is not one way, I'm just talking now if you're listening. Like, I involve everybody, and there is a dialogue, everybody is participating. Not that everybody can stay with that dialogue forever, but they are joining, and if they fall apart, I have some pedagogic tool to bring them back to that dialogue, and that dialogue continues in the class. At least for 2 months, I'm able to continue, or for 1 month, I'm able to continue that dialogue. So students join, they fall out, they join. That's natural. If you assume that they will stay with you, no, they don't. So assume that they fall apart. So you have to do something to bring them up back. If that continues for a month, 2 or 3, the children or the students will anyway learn. There is no second theory of learning. So if the least we can do is to bring children's linguistic, therefore when I say linguistic, it is multilingual resources, multiple languages, multiple affective registers, multiple narrative traditions to classroom, but not that ये सबको लाके छोड़ दीजिए, no. Do some pedagogic work. You engage with concepts, so you bring them to talk about a concept, and then if we develop that dialogue in the classroom, everybody will learn. And so if human intelligence is to inform educational practices, then it can inform best through this concept multilingual intelligence. And if multilingual intelligence is defined in this manner, where it involves cognitive, and when I say cognitive capacities, I don't say Chomsky and Trent, no. I talk about different kinds of domain general cognitive capacities children have, their affective resources, their linguistic resources, and their knowledge systems. All children. I think I'll stop here. And so last thing, we believe that the acceptance of MI will expose the fact that monolinguality is a politically created myth that serves the privileged. Again, this is a different kind of interesting thing. So I just want to conclude with one thing, that I will not say that MI should replace all of the theories. No. MI should open up new spaces of dialogue and understanding human intelligence. It is done through a very divisive process. It should be done very differently. It should be, when we talk about human capacities or human intelligence, we should understand how any child anywhere thinks and how any child anywhere intellectually functions, not perform, functions. I think I'll stop. I'm sorry, initially I was not thinking, understanding what is happening. So,
The floor is open.
I can take questions. Tomorrow we'll do theories where you can get different kinds of.
I thought that was a very interesting talk, lecture. in regards to concepts, the way I understood it was that it's in a sense a means of translating not only what we're able to say to other people, but also what we're able to say to ourselves about cognitive ideas and concepts. So it reminded me of schema theory in a sense. So would it be right to say that multilingual intelligence, the goal of it is in a sense to not limit the schemas that we're able to develop as we learn things or as we go about our life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, schema is very Piagetian concept, and the concept, when we talk about, say this is a concept, say what? Obviously it comes through some kinds of schemes as we talk to each other, and I said, if I cry, the child cries, mother gives water. And then mother said, pani pi lo, mom play lo, nothing bother, log mom bolte hain. And then, the child figures out that if I'm thirsty, I feel nice if I drink water. And then the child also gradually figures out कि कहीं आग है पानी डाल दो बुझ जाता है. So they're different, and then soon they have a shared, category. That's pani. When mother says pani, child understands something, and mother also knows that 1-year-old child doesn't understand this saram se pani pani. They have this shared language which both of them know what they mean, what each other means. And so this is the product of this process of schema formation. Okay, so different aspects get assimilated, a structure develops. This is very Piagetian. A cognitive structure develops, and then that structure is shared. Not that it stays static; it expands also. It assimilates more and more things, and it becomes liquid. Like it's getting assimilated into another broader category. So like more schemas are. So human development in human intellect is also about development of schema. And that's the reason Piaget's theory is called theory of intelligence. Exactly, the whole theory is theory of intelligence. Okay, but that's one way of looking at it. I don't disagree with that. If you take Vygotsky, tomorrow we'll do. Piaget still looks at it through the mental structures. And it's very internalized, and whereas that this scheme is getting formed in the dialogical space, in between space of individuals, mother, child, and others, and like there are other adults, books, and other different artifacts participating in that dialogue. Okay, and the meaning of pani is just not one; it's also many. It's also what it means in one context will be different in another context. So if I want to understand what pani is, I'll also probably have to look at the kind of discursive protocol of which it is part of, from where it evolved. That's Vygotsky. So I'm taking it out of this internal kind of structure to understand it. That's Vygotsky. So the schema is very, very classically Piagetian. And to that extent, you are very right. Yeah. They understand it very differently. Tomorrow we'll talk about how the structures outside create structures outside.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Does ontogeny reflect phylogeny in any real sense?
Yeah. See, it is this, why phylogeny is basic given thing. Because it's the human capacities. Finally, the brain has to process it, and certain kinds of things we still cannot do. It's determined by phylogeny. And so, the kind of experiences I have, but how they distinguish. The distinction is of this kind. I am capable to develop a theory of mind. Okay. That's my phylogenetic history. I have acquired mirror neuron, and therefore I can understand that there are minds, and they're different from each other. Behind every action there is a mind, and I have a mind. And the source of every action of mine is this mind. The child, a very young child, is able to appreciate. That's phylogeny. But then, the kind of perspective I take, you'll find that there are children who are very sympathetic. She says something, and one child doesn't dismiss her. The child is a little sympathetic person and knows that, okay, I don't experience it, but she experiences. Vis-a-vis another child who says that, nahi, ye bahut opinionated hai. Okay. Now both of them still operate very differently. Both of them are using theory of mind, but they are still operating very differently. And the difference can be explained by the ontogenetic history. Both are capable of developing theory of mind, but how they use it and what kind of perspectives they bring in, how frequently they change, and is, thus there is an empathy. Like if we talk about empathy, which is a very complex interpsychological, intersubjective phenomenon, develops differently in different cultures, and that is ontology. That's my everyday experience determine the kind of.
Thank you.
Please ask, if I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer. I'll tell you, somebody else will answer it. So don't worry.
So I'm not thinking based on any of the theories discussed, but for the brain itself, when it is exposed to different languages like English, Hindi, I'm not sure if the brain can really differentiate the language. It is just us giving those words category the language names. So I imagine that the brain could just be exposure to that concept in a word, in a new word. Does it really make a difference for a multilingual or a person who's just heard one language? What is like? It's the context and the exposure that makes the difference rather than the language itself.
What is the last part of your question?
Rather than the language itself, wouldn't it just be the concepts that the person is exposed to that makes the difference rather than the language itself?
Basically knowledge is embedded in language. So freeing concept of language is not very easy. As I'm saying, it's possible. But in a very linguistically mediated world, concepts are also linked to language. But as I'm saying, suppose you are taught addition in Odia, she is taught addition in Hindi, I am taught addition in Hindi and English together. And do we develop sort of similar understanding of addition? It's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm talking about. So what is the last question? So what is the question? Yeah, we can develop similar concepts.
Yes, first.
Actually, very different to say similar. They don't become exactly similar. I tell you, one of my students long back, that was 2008. She said, I'll work on addition. Psychology student here. I said, then do one thing, go to your community, just ask to begin with. How many different ways they talk about addition? जोड़ना है, मिलाना है, इसके साथ इसको भी ले लो. So what different ways they talk about addition. And then see how they algorithmize it. So do they have any algorithmic expressions? Okay. And so suppose in a community where there are 10 words, this is separate hypothesis, obviously they would be imagining addition little differently than another community. Okay. But when it comes across as a work of algorithm, where you have very carefully controlled, the input-output kind of thing, okay, then yes, you can have it, like the IT. Look at the IT scholar. This is a very interesting one I heard in San Diego. They said, if you give one IT problem to an Indian and a Chinese, this is very unique, 2006, and I was laughing when I heard. And if you ask Chinese who will do better, it's okay, Indians also do equally better. just that they take a very complex route and we take a simpler route. Okay, and but there are many expressions. I'm not saying this was the one. They say that Chinese have a very shared algorithmic system. They follow it, they arrive it, and they do a good job. They do it quickly. But Indians also do it well. But some Indians take some strange routes. But they think they do good work. And sometimes creativity could be more there. Okay, so when we talk about very shared, textbook kind of algorithmic work where you control how it is thought about, how it is expressed, then yes, you may say that. But exact shared thing is actually humanly impossible. You have such a thinking mind. So that's the reason imitation is impossible. Because you are not capable of imitating. You are wired to imitate, but that's a creative work. Because your brain anyway interferes. Exact imitation is just not possible. Any other question or comments?
Although I think I needed the money. So, question is more of
Yes.
query that I have. More of a query regarding the idea of intelligence, the initial movement and the force that kind of push intelligence was to differentiate people in all good and bad ways. And I think it's kind of a very different way to look at intelligence for me. At the same time, it's not so much of differentiation. So, do you think that this model supplants the idea of intelligence as traditionally seen, or does it contest the idea of intelligence in the traditional sense?
It actually does the second more. The first maybe, but does the second more. It is the problem of the discipline. When we say that we use it to differentiate, because we always thought in terms of individuals. And individuals therefore have to be different, Otherwise they are not different individuals. The moment I say she's an individual different from her, I'm only talking about differences. So that's the problem of our discipline, psychology. It's from the beginning. But when I was doing this, it was to challenge this whole idea of intelligence. But at the same time, we all talk about intellectual function, not the doing part. So what is a better way of talking about intellectual function?
This whole conversation is taking me back to like the Galton, like individual differences and how psychology started. I think with I'm already thinking about what is the relation of intelligence to differential abilities now, or even how can this concept be applied even in some not just school psychology context but to even higher education. As an instructor, teacher of psychology, I feel very challenged in a classroom with students that have multiple cognitive abilities. What do I do? I think for me it's a political question also. Like you highlighted the epistemic part of it. It's cognitive justice is a concept that's a cognitive liberty.
It's
a big issue. Actually, I had a question on what is your position on coloniality of knowledge. There was a slide with Nandi and
colonizing.
So where do you see because I can see a revision of that concept of intelligence is, I think this gives us a conceptual tool to push that definition, at least in my
Which
understanding.
definition?
The definition of intelligence that somebody has knowledge, somebody is intelligent and in a specific way. I feel like this opens up, a pathway for me. This is, I won't say it's the factor G, but perhaps it's opening up ways for us to think about new ways of conceptualizing intelligence also. Plural imagination of what you do with different abilities. For instance, maybe milkar rehna, maybe in some communities certain other things, just say khana is important. I don't know, there are different ways of conceptualizing what is intelligence. It's not one way to, okay, you do well in a speed test or a reasoning test. That's a very reductive version of thinking about intelligence. That's why somebody is inferior. So,
I agree with you completely. It is this. We have almost officially decided that we will not use IQ, intelligence quotient anymore. And also will not talk about intelligence in a reductionist manner. But whenever we talk about children learning in schools, how they perform in different areas, we always subscribe implicitly to some or other intelligence theory. So you always smuggle in these theories, use them implicitly, but if you are asked to admit, you say, no, I don't. This problematic is already, demonized, is demonized, is seen as racist. So how can you use it? But what I'm saying, talk to any teacher. They all have a theory of intelligence. So whether you talk about it or not, you are using it. Then why not you talk? That's my new context. Like, if I say that no, we don't talk about it, that means we don't really want to deal with that tiger sitting out there. If you want to face the tiger, know that that tiger is sitting out there, just that I'm not admitting it. I've learned not to talk about it because everybody talks about, looks at it as a racist thing. And therefore, I think anything that we reject because it's politically problematic. When I say politics, good politics. Like, I'm not talking about every child, I assume that if I don't use this theory, then I'm better off. But our experiences show that no. So do not engage with the concept and then say, what does it mean? And also listen, human intellect, how can you reject it? No. You have to engage with human intellect. But what intellect means, you need a redefinition. You need a new understanding of it. And you need new ways of challenging it. And intelligence is also about sociality. That's the reason, this is another paper of mine, so I'm not coming to that. Epistemic justice, what you were talking about, cognitive justice. It hugely underlines this. I completely agree with you. My politics is to engage with it and tell teachers that you still continue with this theory. They do. That's our studies show.
So it's very important to almost decolonize, I'm using the word very loosely here, but to place intelligence within that affective, social kind of resources. Otherwise it becomes very like a Piagetian type of concept, but it's very lonely. Somebody's working out a puzzle, that's not I'm sure you will work clinically with children, you will work in school settings, your own experiences. And I find this as psychology students also, even me, we understand our own human experience through these theories and concepts. So how do you develop that critical relation? So I think for me the concept of trans/multi-languaging is very, very crucial. I'll be thinking
and
about
I'm still
it for sure.
struggling, because you may be knowing, translanguaging is very easy for a Chomskyan. You can still defend this. And multilingualism immediately becomes a language kind of project. There are different languages, there is Odia, there is Hindi, and which is politically now more incorrect. Okay? But fact is that when you see people languaging, you realize that both are involved. If identities are around languages, there will be multilingual. Okay? And so the pedagogic work that is consciously developed for multilingual classrooms, where you decide कि ठीक है बच्चों का मदर टंग ले आते हैं 3-4 क्लास तक पढ़ा देते हैं उसके बाद हिंदी में चलाते हैं. And you are anyway drawing up a plan based on that. And we may say that we don't do it, everybody is doing that. Even now some states are using translanguaging pedagogy and they are transiting sooner than the states that are using mother tongue concept. because दो साल में बोलते हैं इनको तो हिंदी आ गया, आप तो हिंदी में पढ़ा सकते हैं. छत्तीसगढ़ is doing that, Madhya Pradesh is doing that, Rajasthan is doing that. So translanguaging is on you anyway, you know. So it gives you earliest exit model.
Sort of
So, हाँ बोलो.
comes from one particular funding source. So again, let's.
It is more political, right?
Yeah, more political rather than.
Much more political. No, so I'll not dismiss. You know that concept I'll not dismiss. But yes, like both the concepts are. It's not easy to take one decision, as I'm saying.
I'm so sorry we have to
No, please.
close now, but I just wanted to give a quick vote of thanks. Thank you for opening our world from word to words. I think you've given us a new concept to think about, and we'll be thinking about in our ways as students, as part of learning community like the university space, what reforming education means for us. So thank you for your time, and
Some of the questions will be repeated.